Hello guys, welcome to another virtual biology lesson. Today it's time for us to continue the topic of functioning of the female reproductive system because as I mentioned before, this is quite complicated, so it deserves a separate lesson. As you remember, female reproductive system is responsible for producing sexual hormones, estrogens and progesterone. And those are female sexual hormones. Their secretion is regulated by the activity of hypophysis, czyli przysadka mózgowa. The concentration of hormones in blood changes in regular time intervals. This leads to changes in the reproductive system, mostly ovaries and mucous membranes of the uterus, which is called the endometrium. This whole set of changes in hormone levels and whatever is happening with the reproductive organs is called the menstrual cycle. Cykl miesiączkowy. In every woman, this lasts for a specific number of days, usually between 26 to 34, so around a month, hence its Polish name miesiączka, cykl miesiączkowy. Usually that number is stable. I mean, every adult woman has this time interval stable. So the whole menstrual cycle will begin in a certain period of time. However, sometimes due to stress, disease, or even troubles and travels that some amount of stress is linked with, its length may temporarily vary. The first cycle appears when the girl is between 11 to 15 years old. So this is the time the hypophysis tells the reproductive organs you start working now. And at the very beginning, the menstruation cycle is irregular. That means that after the first menstruation, to which we will about which we will talk in a second, the first menstruation might show up and then stop for an unknown period of time. At the very beginning, this is quite normal, but if this situation keeps repeating and it's not going to stabilize, then it needs a medical consultation. And menstruation, as such, comes in a few phases. And guys, take a look at the left side of the screen. Here is the diagram. It's very complicated because it shows, sorry for this, it shows days of the cycle. Here it's 28 days because in most of the cases it lasts 28 days. And what is happening with the body, with the uterus, with the ovaries, and basically every single thing uh, that is somehow connected to this. And guys, the first phase of the menstrual cycle is menstruation. Sometimes referred to as period. Po polsku miesiączka lub okres. It happens when the egg cell hasn't been fertilized and uterus is getting rid of it. Endometrium, the mucous membrane that is lining the uterus, having before increased its thickness, now is exfoliating and getting rid of the tissue with some amounts of blood. Basically, menstruation is some amount of blood getting out of the uterus. Uterus muscles are contracting in order to help to get rid of it, and in some cases, this can be really painful. And this is the very first phase that you can see here, the menstrual phase. This is the diagram showing the thickness of the endometrium. As you can see, in the first phase, this endometrium is getting thinner and thinner. What is also happening is the bleeding because the walls of the uterus are basically exfoliating and the tissues are getting out with some amount of blood. After 2 to 7 days, usually, because this is the amount of time needed for the whole endometrium to exfoliate and the bleeding to stop, the bleeding stops and hypophysis releases hormones stimulating one of the ovarian follicles to mature. Follicle is also secreting hormones stimulating the renewal of endometrium. This is the phase of relative infertility, czyli faza względnej niepłodności. So in this phase, follicles are maturing and endometrium is getting renewed. And in this is the phase here. So after 2 to 7 days of bleeding, after 2 to 7 days of bleeding, hypophysis releases hormones that stimulate the ovarian follicles to mature. One of them here is also presented, and what is happening? The estrogens concentration just grows. And this is the hormone responsible for maturation of the follicle. And the next phase that is happening is the ovulation. And ovulation, as you know, is the act of releasing a new ovum. So the mature follicle releases ovum. What is happening instantly, the follicle disappears and turns into corpus luteum and stops producing estrogen. So no other follicles are maturing again. So in the ovulation phase, what is happening? Ovum is released, estrogen production decreases, and the follicle turns into corpus luteum, czyli po polsku ciałko żółte. Right after the follicle releases the egg, it turns into corpus luteum, and corpus luteum releases progesterone. So, right now, with the blue line here, we can see that the concentration of progesterone grows. And this affects the endometrium because progesterone stimulates changes in the mucous membrane of the uterus. It becomes thicker and starts to contain more capillaries, so it's better nutritioned. Okay, so guys, the egg cell lives up to 24 hours after being released, and this is the only moment it can get fertilized. However, sperm cells can live up to 4 days in the oviducts, so technically there is a chance of getting pregnant after having a sexual intercourse 4 days before the ovulation. Hence, the fertility phase is considered to start before predicted ovulation and finishes 5 days after. So ovulation is here, and here is the fertility. Here starts phase 4 days before ovulation, and it lasts. Basically, fertility phase starts, and 1 day after ovulation, the fertility phase ends. And guys, if the egg is not fertilized in this 1 day after ovulation, corpus luteum dies and starts to disappear. And what is happening in here, if this corpus luteum is not fertilized, if the egg is not fertilized, corpus luteum turns into, changes color to white and stops releasing progesterone. So the production of progesterone basically drops. And this is the last phase that starts. Infertility. And guys, what is happening in this phase is that there are low levels of sexual hormones in the body of a woman. So we have not much estrogens, not much progesterone, and this leads to changes in the body of woman, which is sometimes referred to as PMS, which is the premenstrual syndrome, because the body is preparing to the next bleeding, the next menstruation. And guys, PMS, premenstrual syndrome, might occur. What is happening in this is basically a set of symptoms that women report: feeling bloated, fatigue, irritability, acne, tender breasts, frequent mood changes, limb swelling, abdominal pain. Those are the symptoms of upcoming menstruation. Low levels of hormones also lead to exfoliation of the endometrium. The next menstruation starts. So if there are not many hormones, then the endometrium will start to exfoliate, the bleeding will happen again, and then once again we have the menstruation. The situation is completely different in case of being pregnant. Let's imagine in this diagram in, let's say, red or green, If the fertilization occurs, then corpus luteum is not dying and is secreting progesterone all the time. So it goes like this: progesterone, progesterone. And this, first of all, prevents the next ovarian follicles from maturation. So basically, it's, it stops the whole process of development of new eggs for the time of pregnancy, but also it makes the endometrium not exfoliate, so the menstruation stops. In case of fertilization after ovulation, corpus luteum doesn't disappear and keeps on secreting progesterone. This stops follicle maturation and stops menstruation. So basically, one of the symptoms of getting pregnant, which lets women know yes that that yes you're pregnant, is basically the fact that the menstruation stops. But as I said, just because there is no menstruation, there is no exfoliation of the endometrium, doesn't mean that you're pregnant. In the very beginning, in the after in the period of puberty, the the cycle might be irregular, which makes the menstruation once show up, then disappear for a longer time, and then go back. And this needs time to stabilize. But also, and depending on your lifestyle, on your diet, whether you have or whether you do or don't have much stress, then basically this whole cycle can be disrupted easily. But if you're leading a healthy lifestyle, you don't have too much stress, basically you might be sure that your menstrual cycle will not be disrupted. Okay, guys, this is it for today. I will leave you this illustration in the post because this is quite a good representation of what is happening during the pregnancy. And guys, check out the assignment section because there will be something waiting for you. And as usual, that's it. Thanks for watching.